Welcome everybody to Oregon State University's Permaculture Design Pro class. This is the summer and fall class of 2022, and this is our 6th office hour. Today we'll be going through any questions, and it looks like Roman's on, so we'll have any Q&A with Roman, and if anybody else shows up, we'll have a chat with them as well. So Roman, one of your questions was, as I was taking a look before, was if you're looking for early feedback, where can you post for early feedback? And what I found is that if you want early feedback, basically post the assignment that you're looking for feedback on in the place where it would normally be, with a little blurb that says, hey, would the class or would I take a look at this? And generally, if I have enough time, I will take the time to do that. I'll always prioritize the assignments that are due and then the previous assignments that are there. But if you're looking for a little bit of early feedback, especially for things like week 9 and week 10 for the zone 1 design, or even the plant design, which is the week previously, I can give you a little bit of feedback there.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I was looking at, fall is coming, and I was looking at preparing some of the site for next year planting. So I'm trying to define general areas so to see what I can do in October and November.
Yeah, especially when it comes to things like the soil as well. So if you have time to be able to get onto site and start to work the soil assignment, that's really useful.
Yeah, that's my plan. Like I'm trying to expand like the annual crops area and even transition the orchard into like a food forest. So I'm probably going to put a lot of stuff on the ground to prepare it for next year planting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great idea. Site prep, especially from a yearly perspective, can be a make or break conversation for a lot of people. One of the things that, there's a couple of ways I've done it. I've either prepped an entire area or I've prepped planting holes. So the planting hole idea is you're basically layering in sort of a lasagna garden style hole, twice as wide as the root ball and just about as deep, or a little bit deeper, and then you're basically adding an amendment layer into that. So that can be high nitrogen, that can be a biological layer that's active, so be it down and duff from the surrounding area or compost itself, bokashi, things of that nature. And basically when you layer it that way, it's got a year to decompose and get ready for the tree. So if you've got your planting plan pretty much dialed, you can prep that year in advance. The other way is to mulch and sheet mulching or lasagna gardening in a broad field. Another way to do it is to tarp. This is something I do quite a bit, is I'll tarp an area for a year or sometimes 2 before I'm ready for it. And that just helps to allow the grass to die down and to allow the seed bank within the soil to genetically be expressed and then to die out. So that way, when I go to plant, I'm not dealing with a huge amount of undesirable plants.
Yeah, awesome. That's exactly what I'm looking for. So
awesome.
Great. I had one more question
Sure.
that I didn't put in the document because it's a bit complex to explain. Can I actually share my screen to
Please,
show you?
Go ahead. Let me make sure I've got that on. Yep, you should be good.
All right. So I have my base map here, and can you see it well?
I can, yeah.
Okay, awesome. I have quite a bit of most of my winds are coming from the west side, and I have a few trees here, but I definitely need to have increase the wind barrier on this side. I have I don't know if you remember, but I have a perennial stream crossing my yard here. Here's a bit of a wetland. And I'm here right now, it's just grassland. And I'm looking at changing this and making it a native forest at some point, because we don't need that space for us. And I was wondering, I looked at windbreaks and I can see the shape, the triangular shape to try to make the wind rise. So there is you plant some smaller shrubs and trees, and then you go for taller trees to try to lift the wind, so it comes down further, from the sides, from the area you want to protect. And I was wondering, here this is about 20 meter wide. I wanted this to be like more of like a native forest, not necessarily like, you know, like the rows of like the windshields. And so I was wondering, like, if I plant like a native forest, which is like more trees, maybe here I would have like edible like shrubs, so it would be smaller. But like, would that be okay, like in terms of like still like protecting my crop area, I would say, like, and the rest of my yard? Or do I like, or am I like going to create too many turbulences because I'm just building a block of like vegetation?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a really good question. I think first off, when I take a look at your site, it looks like generally from your scale bar here, we're probably 120 meters across. Is that about right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So 120 meters across, if we're taking a look at shelter belt height, we'd want the height of the shelter belt itself to be, roughly 12 meters. So that's generally what our height is. And you're absolutely right. We do want it to ramp up and ramp down. So generally the shape of that is going to be something akin to if we're kind of playing around with cross sections and plant at the same type, we would want sort of shrub, and then we would want trees and shrubs. And this annotation is coming across on your screen as well, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
I can see what you're.
Perfect. So basically when the wind comes up, it ramps up and over. And usually we've got a 10 to 20x on the horizontal for the height. So this height is equal a 10 to 20x of clearance, call it. So if I just clear that for a second, there we go. So what I would recommend is if you're looking at doing a native forest, you can do the exact same thing, but I'd probably take my large scale trees. So whatever those taller trees are going to be, and probably place them more in the central area, just so that way you've got that centralized height there. And then your sub-story canopies can be to either side, something like this. And again, because it's a native forest, you're not worried about managing or harvesting or things of that nature, you can play with the planting and the mosaic pattern. And then the other thing I would do is, because this westerly area definitely curves on your property here, I would keep this type of pattern going along this southern side as well, because this still has some westerly potential. So, keep this pattern generally in that same conversation along this side. And then if you're worried about or working with trying to get enough water over here for establishment, you might also try having areas that are swaled, but with what's called a weir dam off of your stream, if that's permissible to the regulations in your area for the stream. And basically what that looks like is it's a little thick. Let me bring it down. It's a swale that comes into the stream, and then in the stream itself, you've got a little weir dam. So, in profile, what that looks like, if this is our stream channel, and then we've got our stream channel that comes down like this. If we create a swale that juts into this, like so, yeah, I'll redo that. There we go, like so. What'll happen is, if we just put this in directly, this would basically have the ability for water to come in and out. But what we'd want to do is create a little weir, so a little check below it. So that way water would back up, come down here, back up into this channel. And so this would come down here, back up into this channel. And then when this was filled to the weir height, would then cascade over and go down potentially to the next one. So you might be able to do this, well, really as many times as you wanted. So that way this would help to start the watering cycle if necessary for this area, but also would help to distribute this water a little bit more over the landscape. So that could be a potential option for you to help to initially water these trees and help set them up for success.
Okay. you can see outside of the site on the west, sorry, my kid is screaming, but we already have some established trees that are like red maples and Norway maples. Like those are already like 10 to 15 meters tall. And like,
Nice.
I wonder, like, is that going to create like disturbance for, like the windbreak, or is that just okay? And I just do my windbreak
Yeah,
regardless of,
I think
what's
it's
out.
fine. I think I'd probably use that as the leading edge for some areas. So with that in mind, I'm just going to clear this and then start again. With that in mind, I might, if that's already at 10 or 15 feet, I might use my tall trees, or pardon me, my shorter trees, and I might take those gaps and do the gaps with your shorters, your ramp ups, like so. And then what I might do is then come back in, because we already have that 12-meter break right away, and it'll create a little bit of a disturbance, but it'll be fine. And then do your taller trees behind that, and might save you a little bit of planting.
Okay.
And that way
Interesting.
you're a bit more bespoke to what you already have pre-established.
Yeah. So, and here you have just one row, of taller trees. If I was to extend that to like fill in more the area with taller trees,
Yeah.
could that be an issue, or would that be fine as long as I have like a down slope, like as long as I come down with shorter trees on the other side?
No, that's fine. That's fine. If you wanted to do like a full native forest and you wanted to take this entire area and fill it, so something like this, where you're like, you want this whole area to be forested, that's totally fine. Because what'll happen is, if we're taking a look in profile, the wind will basically come up to, let's say, our classic hedgerow or shelter belt and come up and over. But if it's bigger or longer, actually, I'll just do this again. So if it's bigger or longer, so let's say we have quite a number of taller trees, that wind will continue to come down and tumble and come down and tumble, and it'll actually quite be broken by the time it comes back up and over. So yeah, I think if this is your desire to have more native forest, that's totally fine.
Yeah, that was like it was a bit my concern, is like, because I really wanted to have that entire space be native forest. My idea right now is to have it be like an entire like foraging, like more like in the wild foraging, like have berries, and nuts and things like almonds, pecans, like whatever, like hazelnuts and any kind of berries we can find in my area, and just like create a path through all the trees, and just like use it as like, hey, you go out and you forage. I might grow mushrooms. I don't know yet, but we have a foraging experience in there.
Yeah.
But I was concerned having a thicker, like forest was gonna create turbulence. But it sounds like on the opposite, it's even better, because it might break the wind even further to have like a thicker, like a wider space.
Yeah. Yeah. And it may be that our vocabulary is a little different, but the turbulence that it creates is actually great, because what it'll do is it'll break up the wind, and the wind won't ramp up into speed and then come down and crash. And that can sometimes be the problem with either abrupt shelter belts, be they either vegetative or hardscaped. The wind will come up, and it'll come up with such strength that it comes down in such strength. And I've seen a couple of jobs where the shelter belts that were created were placed perfectly so that way the wind would come down on the house. And it's remarkable, like the loss of shingles, the moving of wood, board, and batten because of that. So when you're looking at this, I think having more of that forest, and this is what we see definitely when we're taking a look at cut blocks or we're taking a look at conservation areas, all of that creates a calmed area. And so you'll end up with this little eye of the storm, if you will, where the human habitation area is, if you're working with animals or annuals or anything like that. Because the number one thing when we get into especially into continental North America is wind. Wind will remove up to, I think, 30 or 40% of an animal's weight. And of course can destroy tender seedlings when we're getting into annual plants. So the buffeting of that wind, I think you've accurately identified as a major priority, and the way you're going about it to coalesce or to overlap with your desires to work with a native forest work really, really well. You could do either. I think is the ultimate thing to say, is that if
Okay.
somebody had
Awesome.
more designs on this area to have as forage, let's say for animals, and wanted to do alleyway cropping to the point to where they wanted to do something like, yeah, they're going to have the shelter belt, but then they want to have alleyways with little pastures and shade and fodder crops, they could. But this is what's so great about permaculture design and regenerative design is that for you, having this all as native forest is a higher value. And working with that sort of ramp up and ramp down idea, you'll find that you'll get the exact same wind protection that you would with a shelter belt, and probably a little bit more because that wind will be quite broken up.
Awesome. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I mean, I've thought about, like expanding the harvesting area, but I'm like, I have already too much land for my family and friends. So it's like, I don't need to, yeah, I don't know if I have the time, and I don't need also like that much space for me to grow food.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was looking at giving back a bit to like the wildlife that we have around.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Okay. We talked about the wind a bit, and one thing we have in my area is a lot of humidity, and then that can create issues with annual crops, like with disease, like fungus, and so like if I stop even more wind from going through my crops, I might have even more fungal disease. So is there anything other than working with like working more on like spacing of my annual crops that I can do for that or not?
Yeah, so you hit probably the major one, which is spacing on two levels. One is, if you're taking a look at a grid row, and let's say your normal spacing is, 6 inches in a triangle. If you have less and less and less wind, and you already have high humidity, you may space this out. You may double this. You may go to, instead of 6, you may go to 12, just so that way you've got more space in between these crops, which is smart. The other thing you may want to do is you may want to mound in your beds. So that just means that if you mound up, then generally you will get micro airflow that'll move through your plants. And if you plant on mound, that wind will come up and through and down. And then the last thing is, especially with pruning, you'll want to be on your pruning if you're working with fruit trees or other types of production style trees, and make sure that they're well pruned, so that way the airflow throughout those trees is as optimal as it can be while still getting quite a bit of fruit. So those are kind of the major things that we usually worry about when we're looking at humid spaces and wind flow.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, the mounds is already something I was looking at because I get a lot of water and I have a ton of clay in my soil. So I need to improve drainage. And even in the summer, I get quite a bit of water. So like, I'm not too concerned about retaining as much water as possible. Okay, interesting. The mounds, like, is there like a direction you should consider the mounds compared to the wind, or like, do you put them in the direction of the wind or not? Or it just doesn't matter?
No. Like if this is the house here and you're thinking, vegetables, I don't know, somewhere around here, because you've already taken care of that wind, the mounds are really just for micro airflow. They're not for that major airflow buffeting or deflecting. They're basically to make sure that they're not as waterlogged as they might be, especially with a clay soil. So I would say, in terms of that, I would probably put them in such a way that they were off contour, because you already have a clay soil. So make sure that, if this is contour and you've got your mound is going to go across this and predominant to the ridge. So if this is ridge and over here is generally valley, that planting mound is going across. So that way, if water comes towards it, then that water will shed and won't be held behind it. Because with clay soils, we already have too much water. Normally, we're usually quite waterlogged. So if you do mound up, you don't want those mounds to be classic swales, if you will, or any sort of like half swales or smiley face swales or net and pans, because they'll hold too much water. You want them to be a little bit off crossways and then being able to shed that.
Awesome. I have you on one on one. So, you know, I'm trying to think of the micro questions I have to
No
that
worries. Go for it. Yeah, go for
could
it.
be helpful for me. That's great. um,
Roman, it looks like your connection's a little. Oh, we might have lost you.
Can you hear me?
There we are.
I don't know what happened. My Wi-Fi dropped.
Okay.
Yeah, the last question, I don't need the screen sharing anymore, but I was like before we talked about life staking, you know, and for me to repopulate that grassland to like go with pioneer species. So I did a bit of research. I have a bunch of pioneers that I plan to introduce. Like, should I also introduce some of the species that, you know, would be at the climax of what a native forest is at the same time, or should I wait? Like, my plan is to like mulch heavily with like wood chips to like also help the soil, right? But like if I live stake, those are going to be tiny trees, and it's going to take a while. And I don't know, like wood chips, like how much can I accelerate the process of planting the actual like trees that would be there at the climax? Like I'm thinking more oaks and hickories potentially.
Yeah, so there's anecdotal information on this, and there's some science behind this, and then there's the person I always relate to and go to, which is David Polster's work. Now, David Polster, as we spoke about before, is an incredible man who proved to the Canadian Department of Transportation that when they had cut the Trans-Canada Highway across Canada, they had gone through quite a number of mountain passes, and they had thought that if they just put climax species and wildflowers, then that's what they would get. They would get climax species and wildflowers. And with his live staking, he was able to show that, and there's some great photos where you can see them side by side. You can see that the conifers that the Department of Transportation planted are smaller than the conifers that the ecology planted. So when birds alight upon trees after they land and before they take off, they'll drop these little fertility packages with seeds and whatever else has been running through them. And the conifers with the seeds that either birds dropped or found their way onto that landscape, those conifers were bigger than the ones that were planted at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 year. So there's kind of two thoughts about this. One is you create the conditions in a pioneer forest, so that way seeds of conifers that are on the wind or are animal distributed find their way into exactly the place they need to be, and they grow. If it were I, and I was trying to do this, and if I was able to reach out to an extension agent at one of the local universities or one of the local state agricultural extension agencies or nurseries, and I could get my hands on, 1,500 oaks or hickories at, 5, 10, 15 cents per tree, because that still happens in the US, I might do that as well, because at a seedling stage, it's not like you're putting in a 4 or 5 year old tree. You're starting with something quite young, and the cost per unit is low enough that you can put in a bunch, and if they don't work, they don't work. But the great thing is up until about 3, 4, 5 years, trees are very forgiving if you move them. Majorly, like some of them are unforgiving, but you could take one out, and if you plant it too heavily, you could move it someplace else or sell it, or there's lots of ways to work that. So if it were I, with the resources that you're saying, I think wood chips are a great idea. I think live staking is a great idea. And if you did start seedlings yourself or get access to a great quantity of seedlings from an agricultural extension agency or one of those state nurseries, at a low price per unit cost, buy a bunch, sell half of them to people around you at, a markup of 25 or 30%, because now they're locally in the area. You might even be able to cover quite a bit of your nursery. This is something I've done a number of times where I'll get my hands on a wholesale nursery. I'll make sure my order's taken care of, and then I'll offer service to those around me, offering like a once a year nursery service where I say, hey, here's the catalog. I'll mark up the prices by 25, 30% because I'm taking the risk of bringing them in. I get the finance in when they order. This was an important thing to learn. And then there's a single day of pickup, and I don't offer a lot of variable on that. So it's like, great, Saturday, this day, my trees come in on Friday, Saturday's pickup day. I'm not holding any trees. If they die in my yard, they die in my yard. It's up to you to pick them up. And that's been brilliant to be able to populate new food forests, new orchards, especially at a younger stage. Once you get into trying to get to a higher caliper of tree, which is vocab word about dimension, that becomes a little problematic. But yeah, I'd probably do it both ways if the finances made sense.
Okay, makes sense. Awesome. Yeah, lots to do. It's exciting.
Yep.
It's a lot to think about. It's like a lot of small projects within a huge project. But yeah. Okay, awesome. It's fascinating how much there is to learn, which is very exciting too. It's like, yeah. Okay, great. I think that's it for me for today.
Perfect. Well, you chose the right day to come. You were a student of one
sure.
and got some dedicated one-on-one time. So good on you.
Awesome. Thanks, Javan. You have a
Awesome.
nice week.
You too. Take care, sir. Bye now.